Hello and welcome to the NZCFL podcast. I am here with Ryan. Say hello, Ryan.
Hey everyone.
And we're here to recap week one of NZCFL. We had a lot of action this week, a lot of upsets, a lot of blowouts, a lot of blowouts, and a lot of drama. We're here to talk about all of that, and we'll get started with the top 25 teams and how they did this week. We will start with the top teams and then move our way down as we go. We're going to start with Ohio State, who was ranked number one preseason. Again, immediate questions for Ohio State. They've had issues many times in the past, getting upset, not quite living up to potential preseason. And this time it reigns true with Tennessee. A lot of people are questioning them. I don't think it's that big of an issue. They only lost by 10, 38-28 at home against Tennessee. And here's why I don't think it's that big of an issue. I think Tennessee is a lot better than they were last year. I think they've made vast improvements from the team that they were. And I think first week things happen and Ohio State holds on and does get a victory here over
Yeah, I
Tennessee.
definitely agree with you. Sorry about that. I definitely agree with you on that, Secret. I think this is mainly a case of Tennessee just being good rather than Ohio State being bad. Like if you look at the stat lines, Dylan Norton, he throws 25 for 32, got 2 touchdowns, no picks, only sacked once. I think the really big thing here is that Tennessee's offense just seemed to pop off. But even when you look at it, when there was 4 minutes left, Ohio State was up 38-21. So honestly, the scoreline looks a little bit closer than it actually was. And I think Ohio State's defensive coordinator might want to work through a few things at practice. But overall, I don't think there's much to worry about over here.
Absolutely. Another thing I want to point out with this game is Tennessee got off to a great start and Ohio State. It looked like Ohio State was going to be the same old Ohio State, but they bounced back. They came back into the game in the second half and they immediately crushed Tennessee in the second half to take the victory. And that is what you want from a number one team. And it's week one. Everything's going to get better from here. So, anything lastly you want to talk about Ohio State?
I think no, yeah, it's definitely a slow start, but Ohio State started off strong before and just finished really weakly. So if you had to pick one of them, might as well end strong, right? So we'll see what they have in store for next week, but overall, I don't think there's too much else. Michael Marion, though, 17 tackles. Well, he's gonna be in the he's gonna be in the sauna quite a bit this week. But props to Ohio State, and also props to Tennessee for keeping this one close.
Absolutely. Moving on to the next team, we're going to go with my number two, UCLA Bruins. Try not to be biased here, but I don't think there's much to talk about either way. 78-7 victory, just completely crushing over a really bad team and just nothing really to say. Anything about you, Ryan?
I am a little bit concerned about Walter Russ's 2 picks. I know he only had 4 incompletions, but half of those incompletions were to the other team. But overall, like Josh Scott, 4 rushing touchdowns. Obviously, you'd like to see a little bit more yardage from him. He only had 93. But he's definitely putting points on the board. And honestly, UCLA is going to be a force this year. And Fresno State, we're just their first victim. I don't think they're going to be the last.
All right, moving on. We're going down the list. Number three now. See here, Michigan is the big one. This is a huge one. They played ranked 17th Virginia, and if you look at this game, it was close the entire time. Virginia pulled away in the fourth, but Michigan responded immediately and got it right back to tied. But they did not hold on defensively. Kevin Roach leads Virginia down the field, and Ben Schmidt delivers the dagger with 4 seconds left. 36-33 Virginia, upset on the road at number three Michigan. What do you think, Ryan?
I think this game was the Ryan Callahan game. I mean, he's got 100 speed. He's outrunning everyone on the field. He got 139 rushing yards and a touchdown against Michigan's defensive front. And if you look at Michigan's defensive front, they're ranked one of the best units in the league. They're top five. And so I think just looking at that, you can probably tell where most of Virginia's offense is going to be coming from this season. And yeah, watch out for them. They might be a little bit underrated by the engine.
Absolutely. Over 500 total yards for Virginia. Their offense was just explosive, and Michigan tried to come back, but in the end, their defense is the one that sold and took Virginia and gave Virginia a number three victory on the road. a little bit concerning for their defense for Michigan, but I think it's more so just Virginia's offense being maybe that good right now.
I'd agree. It's the Ryan Callahan show.
The Ryan Callahan show. Oh, we can watch for him and see if he's up there for the rest of the season.
Oh
Nextly,
yeah, for sure.
number 4, we're going to move on to Northwestern, a team that I think is going to be an explosive offense, one of the best all year. But today there really wasn't much to talk about. They played a bad Harvard team, won 61 to nothing, and just dominated the entire game. There was nothing
Yeah.
here. The Harvard had 25 passing yards and 3 picks. 25 passing yards.
What does concern me though is if you take a look at the penalty metrics, Northwestern still got penalized 7 times for 55 yards in such a big blowout. Like, imagine if this is happening right now in Harvard out of all places. I'm sure half the fans probably left after like the first quarter. Imagine what would happen when they're playing down the stretch in these very tough stadiums in the Big Ten. That's going to be something we're going to have to look out for. But I'm sure Coach Circle, he has his ways, he has his voodoo magic. It's going to get all figured out. I'm confident in that.
And you got to remember, it is week 1. There are going to be issues with that. And also, I want to point out, it's not just Northwestern here. I think the rest were just a little whistle happy today. Harvard had 103 penalty yards on the day.
Oh, yeah.
Moving on, we're going to move to number 5, Georgia, the previous national champions of NZCFL, and they're back at it again. Today they played Northern Illinois on the road. It didn't matter. Georgia shrugged them off 40-2. They only allowed 1 safety, and Northern Illinois only had 47 passing yards. Again, just domination. Nothing except one thing of note. Alonzo Sims, Heisman candidate, goes down with a sprained knee. He is questionable for quite the amount of season. They're saying he could be out 3 weeks, 5 weeks, anywhere in there, and he might be a sore spot for Georgia as their backup is Ethan Reynolds, and he has not had very much experience at all. What do you think, Ryan?
I mean, yeah, there's not much to talk about from this game. I think most Georgia fans are worried about the next couple of weeks, but I do have good news for them. It seems as if Alonzo Sims is probably going to be out around 4 weeks. That's what I'm hearing from my sources. And 3 of those weeks, Georgia's favored by at least 24 and a half. So they're playing Oklahoma State, Arizona State, and Mississippi State. All those teams are heavy underdogs against the dogs. The game I am concerned about on behalf of Georgia fans, though, is Week 3 against South Carolina. They're only favored by 6.5. The Bulldogs are, and that's really the question. Coach Dogwood has a dilemma on his hands. Do I start my backup quarterback Reynolds, or do I thrust Alonzo Sims, maybe not a fully healthy Alonzo Sims, in there? Do I trust Ethan Reynolds? Do I go with my injured quarterback? Because if you saw what Ethan Reynolds actually put on the field when he was in there, he threw 70%, over 100 yards. He threw a passing touchdown. His QB rating's at a 136. Like, he wasn't bad by all means, but also it seemed as if the team was playing a little bit worse in front of him. Like, he got sacked twice compared to Alonzo Sims getting sacked 0 times, and he played a lot more of the game. I just wonder, does he have control of the room? Is that going to be a factor down the stretch against South Carolina and maybe some other teams if this injury lingers on?
I think the main thing is you can't say, oh, Ethan Reynolds is good based on this game or Ethan Reynolds is bad based on this game because they're playing a very awful team with their Georgia weapons. These weapons are absolutely explosive. And if there's any weapons in the country that could carry a quarterback like Ethan Reynolds, it would be this Georgia room weapons.
Exactly. I mean, they got the number 9 ranked running back room. They got the top wide receiver room in the league. I mean, if you're going to have an injured quarterback, Georgia's the team that should be the least worried about it. But then again, it's the SEC, and Dogwood has a history of getting upset by some teams. You never know. That's why we play the games.
Absolutely. I will say week 4, Arizona State, it might not seem that good, but Arizona State did get a big upset, and I will talk about that later. And we'll see how that game goes as well with Alonzo Sims. He should be more healthy. I think that Georgia should walk away with an easy win, but it's another game to note.
Amazing.
All right. Moving on to the next team. We're going to number 6, and this is another big one. Number 6 and number 7 on game day. This game was back and forth, but there's one thing that is to note more than the rest. Army just could not hold on to the football. They just could not. They threw one pick. They had 4 fumbles. No, 2 picks and 2 fumbles. No, wait. Yeah, it was 2 picks and 2 fumbles. So 3 fumbles. Sorry, 3 fumbles and 2 picks. See, I can't even keep track of how many there are. There's just so many. And Army, on top of that, all those turnovers, Army's offense was just not consistent. They couldn't consistently get a drive together. It was either all 80-yard, 70-yard passes or nothing for Army. It was just awful consistency. And if they had any consistency, this game was theirs, but it was not there. They had penalties, they had turnovers. It was just not a good game for Army. Thoughts?
Mhm. I mean, yeah, I think honestly, if I had 3 words to describe this game for the quarterbacks, I'd call it the battle of mid. Like, I know these two defenses are really good, but Zach Alexander, 21 for 40, 1 touchdown, 2 picks, held under 200 yards. Nelson Bynum threw 50%, 19 for 38. He had a little bit better game, 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, but those 2 interceptions hurt, might have cost him the game. I mean, I think honestly, these two teams are probably going to be fine. At the end of the day, it's just a matter of two highly ranked teams playing each other. Things like this are going to happen. I think Nelson Bynum, he might be in it over his head about the 2 interceptions and the fumble that he lost. He might be doing some extra PT. We don't know what's happening at West Point, but I think honestly, both teams are probably going to be fine. It's just a few things to clean up. Army just keep shooting themselves in the foot. Ironic because they're the ones with the guns, but hopefully they figure that out in the coming weeks. And honestly, for the sake of our country too, if these guys decide to serve and not go to the league. But overall, I think both programs still have the inside lane to make the playoffs. I wouldn't worry too much if I were them, especially if I were a Bama fan. I'm happy to walk away from this week with a win.
Absolutely legendary commentary from Ryan there. We're going to switch over back to Alabama, number 7. I'm just going to talk about them real fast.
Mhm.
Alabama should have absolutely dominated this game because Army just could not. They just kept giving Alabama the ball in the red zone, inside the 5, inside the 20. It was just consistent all day long. And what did Alabama do? They kicked a field goal. They kicked a field goal. They kicked a field goal. They could not punch the ball into the end zone for the life of them all day long. It was terrible. It was just absolutely awful. It was so painful to watch for their fans, I bet.
And I
At the end
think
of the day, at the end of the
mhm.
day, they pulled off a win. I think Alabama's extremely happy with that, and they'll walk away from this one thinking they stole it.
Building off on that, like I think a huge question mark coming out this game is star wide receiver Kendrick Foreman. I mean, he is rated a 70, 86, but I mean, he's not the fastest. He only has 47 speed. He was targeted a whopping 20 times. He was half of Zach Alexander's throws or attempts this game, but he only caught 9 of them. And he averaged 9.2 yards per reception. That's not what you want to see from one of the top receivers and one of the top teams in the country. I think, for that matter, overall at Alabama, I think sure some of these throws were Alexander's fault, but you can't be getting away with all these drops, all these blown routes. I think the wide receiver core at Bama's got some work to do to mop it up. I mean, their running back room is doing fine. Rage and Swift combined for nearly 130 yards, actually over 130 yards, my mistake, and 2 touchdowns. It's just, can Alabama attack the air? Because especially when you have a struggling young quarterback like Zach Alexander, you don't want, and he's trying to make it to the league. He's already 22. He's showing off for these scouts. He knows this is crunch time. You need to support him as best as you can, or else Bama's going to get into a lot of dogfights and they're going to play down to their competition, which in the SEC you cannot do. That is playing with fire.
This is Alabama's bread and butter. Their rushing game has always been their bread and butter, the thing that they lean on when they need it. But today, it was their passing game not being there when they needed it that really
Hmm.
kept this game close. And I will say, Zach Alexander had 19 incompletions. 11 of those were to Kendrick Foreman. Kendrick Foreman needs to do better than that. That
Exactly.
is unacceptable. Unacceptable. Moving on, though, we're going to move on to who was it? Number 8 USC. That's the next team. Let's see, they played the UNLV Trojans on the road. They were favored 39 and a half, and they only win by 21. But worse than that, their defense was abysmal. 56-35. They allow UNLV 35 points, which is absolutely unacceptable. That is UNLV you're talking. If they play UCLA or San Diego State, or anyone in the Pac-12 that can put up a lot of points. That's just not happening. You can't allow 35 points to UNLV. They allowed 276 rushing yards, which is absurd. Like, that's crazy. Al Riley, 16 carries, 214 yards, 13.4 yards a carry, and 2 touchdowns. What's going on? Well, they're just getting bullied by UNLV out here. Their
I agree,
defensive
and
line.
and I think something that's gone a little bit under the spotlight too is actually USC's offense. Because if you just look at the box score, they put up 56 points. Hans Stadham, the junior quarterback, he completed over 96% of his passes. It looks like he had a perfect pass rating. It looks like all was amazing. But then look at that offensive line. They have three healthy linemen heading into next week, and I'm sure at least Johnny Reagan and Joe Griffin, they're week to week, so they might play next week. We have no idea. But even then, USC on a good day is starting a 37 overall at left guard. You cannot afford to be doing that. Hans Stadham got sacked 3 times by the defense that they were facing this week. And sure, you might want to give UNLV their flowers, but in the reality, when USC plays bigger competition like UCLA, like other teams in the Pac-12, Hans might get hurt. And I would genuinely be concerned for that. I think their new coach, Jeremy, has his work cut out in front of him to try to fix that offensive line in the future, but also in the season, trying to get through it. And also, Alex Grinch, please stay away from USC. This was a classic late 2010s, early 2020s USC game. I'm sure they're going to figure it out, but it's going to take some time. It's a good thing they play UCLA very late in the year, week 12.
They have time to figure things out before all those tough games. Well, let's take a look at this schedule for USC real fast. They don't really get a break.
No, they don't.
Week four, they get thrust into Alabama immediately. They have 3 weeks until then? They need to figure this out immediately because Alabama just runs it right down your throat. They can just continually pound the ground right up the middle. And I don't know if USC's D line can stop that, considering UNLV's stats.
I don't think USC's D line could stop UNLV's offense, let alone any of the high powered teams. Like, if we're looking here, I think USC definitely was hurt by the fact they didn't have a coach this offseason. They're they're underdogs by 7 points against Bama in week 4. But even against like teams like Cal, it's a single digit spread against teams like Washington, Vanderbilt. I know they were a good team years ago, but they've taken a step back this year. They're underdogs against Oregon, San Diego State, and UCLA in the final 3 weeks of the season. It's not looking amazing if they can't get this thing turned around, especially because they're underdogs by almost 15 points at the Rose Bowl week 12. They got to figure that out.
Absolutely. And I will say one thing, Al Riley, he looked good in this game, but man, last year, total yards, he had 637 all year. He played 11 out of 12 games, 637, 4 touchdowns. What is going on, USC? What's happening? You allowed him a third of his entire rushing yard in his career in one single game. Just no excuse.
I think that, yeah, the defense is an issue, but they played the game. They see the box score. They know what's up. It's just, can they get that done? That's the real question here.
Absolutely. Moving on, we're going to move on to another Pac-12 school. We're going to move to Washington, who I also have not much to talk about. No, not yet.
Sorry,
Washington
do you mean
State.
Washington
I'm
State?
sorry.
Yeah.
Washington State. I said Washington. Let's see. I was wondering why, because they're not ranked that high. Washington State, number 9. They played against Iowa on the road and they killed them. No doubt about it. They killed them. There was nothing here to talk about. For me, Iowa had 3 turnovers. Washington State over 500 yards, 63-10 victory on the road.
Yeah, I think you pretty much summed it up. It was an absolute smackdown. The notoriously good Iowa defense just did not work, and you had that offense. Chucky Cole, ooh, that was an ugly performance. 3 picks, 6 sacks as well. He was betrayed by his lineman. But overall, yeah, I think they're kind of showing why, no offense to Hawkeye Nation, but why they were relegated from the Big Ten a couple years ago for Utah State. And it hasn't been on the up and up since. I believe Coach Everest is still in Iowa, and he has his work cut out for him.
Absolutely. A lot of work there to be done in Iowa. Moving on to number 10, Utah State. A really down Notre Dame. They weren't having very much expectations, but you have them at home. You win 20-7. I think you're happy with that, Ryan. What do you think?
I think I am happy overall because when you look at Notre Dame's roster, I know they haven't had too much of an active coach over these past few seasons, but they're stacked. Their recruiting classes from the past couple of years are still really good, and now they're kind of peaking as juniors and seniors. Their only big question mark is at quarterback. I mean, they're starting Kent Dunbar, who's at 32 overall. I think that was kind of the reason why they lost that game. But they have Antonio Humphrey, an 86 overall receiver. They have Christian Lee and John Hobson in the backfield, 57 and 55 overall. They have elite defensive players like Daniel Campbell and Darren Fairchild, who are in the 60s as defensive linemen. I think they have the pieces. They just don't have some players at key spots like quarterback, like cornerback, a ton of different places, and that's really what's costing them. So I think overall Utah State should be happy that they won by 13. I believe the spread was 16 anyways. So going into South Bend, taking on that team in that very tough crowd, I will say the question marks around Leonard Powell still are there. I mean, he had an amazing freshman offseason coming in to Utah State, but he was redshirted. He seems very unmotivated. He barely completed over half of his passes. I don't think he's improved over this last offseason. And I mean, I'm the coach. I can kind of tell you this. I've been trying to put in as much effort to get weapons around Leonard Powell, and it might not be working. We really have to see what's in store these next couple of weeks. But they play Florida State next week in Tallahassee. I don't think there's too many issues. And my mistake, I did mention that they went into South Bend. This was actually a home game for Utah State. So my apologies on that part. I should have known. I was actually coaching on the sidelines. But it should be fine for them. I wouldn't have any worries. I would see what they're going to do against Florida State. I would say though, if they put up under 30 points against the Seminoles, that would be cause for concern, but I don't.
Absolutely. I will say another thing about this game was Utah State's penalties. They had 11 penalties for 95 yards, a little bit sloppy. And I think that Ryan is going to work to fix that going forward immediately.
It was the Leprechaun Gold. Don't worry about it.
All right. Moving on to the next team. We're going to go to number 11, Nebraska, and talk about the Cornhuskers, a team that a lot of people said, including me, thought they were overrated. And immediately they lose at home to number 13 Iowa State, and they flat out just get beat. Their rushing attack was good, but not good enough to support their passing attack, which was frankly abysmal. It was not good. They had 34 attempts, completed 50% of him. Orsini did 132 yards only, one pick, no touchdowns. A quarterback rating of 47.
Go ahead. Yeah, and I think it's definitely a shame. Sorry about that. Sorry for cutting you off there, Secret. It's such a shame because Nebraska's such a talented roster. They have a positive rating. They have playmakers at every single position, except the one that matters the most, and that's at quarterback. You have four quarterbacks that are between 36 and 42 overall, but none of them are actually good enough to elevate this offense. None of them are even good enough to be a system quarterback, and I hope one of them proves me wrong because Nebraska just has so much potential. All their players had amazing off seasons. The only problem is they don't have a signal caller in the backfield.
Absolutely a big issue for Nebraska. I told you they're going to have to hold teams to under 20, the 17 range, 13 points, 10 points, and score like 20. And here they allow 27 and they lose. And I think that's exactly how the season is going to go. They score more than 20 and keep their opponent to under 20. They win. If they don't, they're going to lose.
And allowing the opposing quarterback to complete almost 85% of his passes, that's not exactly a recipe for success. Especially when you're talking about needing to hold the other team to like maybe single digit points to win the game. That is just unacceptable. Letting him throw for 3 touchdowns. The 3 sacks are good, but you need to stop him from completing his passes.
I mean, this defense, I'm just going to tell you, it is elite. Iowa State did not care. They came into Cornhuskers. They just completely decimated Nebraska's defense, shrugged it off, and completely dominated the entire game. There was no point in this game.
Linebacker core. They had 16 tackle for losses between the 4 of them. Like, if I'm Nebraska's O lineman, what can I do? Like, there's nothing I could do during that game to stop them. They just seemed that they were coming through every single snap. It was a war against them, and Nebraska was just on the losing side of that. And I think that ultimately determined the outcome of this game because when you don't have a confident quarterback in the backfield, the least you can do is to provide him with a competent offensive line, to give him some extra time to think, to calm his nerves. And Nebraska just didn't do that week one.
Absolutely. And it's another thing where I think Iowa State's D line could be the issue here. I think Iowa State's D line is very much could be the problem and could be the issue for Nebraska here. They could be a very good D line. They could be very good linebackers, which I think the linebackers are the problem defensively here. They're causing huge issues. They're disrupted on the passing game. They're getting penetration in the backfield, and they're just causing Nebraska a whole slew of problems at quarterback. He couldn't
Yeah,
get
don't get me
time.
wrong. hmm
Couldn't get
Don't.
time. He just
mhm.
he just lost the game because of it. He just couldn't get time, and he couldn't complete passes downfield. He didn't have time for any of that. He kept dumping it off for 5, 9 yard gains, but in the end, it just wasn't enough.
I mean, yeah, don't get me wrong. Iowa State is a good team. They still have a positive rating. They have three quarterbacks of at least 53 overall. Ooh, Coach Heim was so mad that at least one of them couldn't be on his side of the field during this game. But I mean, that's something for the offseason. They have a good team too, but I'm sure if they want to be talked about, they should get ranked. They should move up the rankings. I have faith that they will after this performance against Nebraska. I think we should move on.
Absolutely. Next team we're going to talk about is San Diego State, number 12 ranked in the country. They really did come out of nowhere this season, has a lot of weight on them for the first time in a while. And they didn't care. They came in, dominated Tulane, 63-21 was the score. Defense being a little bit questionable, but I don't really think it was a problem. They just kind of dominated and probably put the backups in, to be honest. What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, and I mean, Jonte Roland, 7 touchdowns and no interceptions. That is what you like to see. We've been seeing a whole ton of performances by players like Walter Russ and other QBs throwing for an absurd number of touchdowns, but this is the cleanest stat line out there with a 0 in the interception column. I think Jonte Roland, a lot of Aztec fans can be excited about him. I mean, the redshirt senior, this is his last season. He's trying to impress coaches to make it to the big leagues. And I know his vision has still been a concern. I mean, it's still at 28, but at least for this game, he completed almost 70% of his passes. I would have faith going down the road in that tough pack schedule.
Absolutely. San Diego State, another team to watch in the Pac South. Tulane, maybe not so much in their conference. Moving on, we're going to be skipping number 13 because that's Iowa State. We've already chatted about them. Anything else you want to say about them before we move on?
No, I think quality team, they should be a contender this year, and I wouldn't be surprised if they made it out of the MAC to even maybe push for a playoff appearance.
Absolutely. They're the team to watch in the MAC for me right now, along with Marshall. We'll talk about Marshall in a second. Next
Mhm.
is number 14 ranked Ole Miss and the Rebels. We're going to be pulling that up. Ole Miss played Kentucky, and it was not a competition. Absolutely not a competition. 47-15 was your final score, and their quarterback threw for 491 yards, 5 touchdowns, with a percentage of 67.5%. I mean, just complete domination. Another thing to worry about, though, Kentucky, you let them get 261 yards on the ground. Nick Blankenship, what was his stat line last year? He had 1,100 yards, which is pretty decent. He's a decent running back, it seems like, but he doesn't really scream like a Power Five running back that can just dominate a game and just pull a team forward. And it just seemed like he was that in this game. Maybe he's much better than he was last year, but or maybe it's a problem for Ole Miss, and I'm leaning towards maybe a problem for Ole Miss here, where they just let up too many rushing yards. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, at least Ole Miss is doing what they couldn't before, like 30 years ago, by beating Kentucky at least this time, and by a pretty hefty margin. I wouldn't be too concerned, especially their offense, I think, is pretty solid. At defense, they have all the right players at the right positions. I mean, their defensive line and their cornerback core looks solid. It's just a question at the safety position, and honestly, I wouldn't even be too concerned about that. I think they're they might be a dark horse to take it in the SEC this season, but we'll really see. They definitely do have to tighten up against the run. I think part of that was a blown play to, I believe it was Caleb Wright. He had one rush for 73 yards. He's normally a wide receiver. So on that jet sweep, they were just completely fooled. But other than that, I think if you subtract that play, which I know that's not how things work, it does look a little bit better. You held them to under 200 rushing yards, but even then, it's not pretty. They will have to figure that out.
Absolutely. And
Absolutely.
Kentucky,
And
again,
Kentucky, again,
it doesn't have the offensive prowess and the O line to support such a run game. So we'll have to see if the better O lines bully them even further, or if Ole Miss steps up going forward.
agree.
Next team we're going to talk about is number 15, Stanford and the Cardinal. And they played Alaska. Don't get me wrong, Alaska's not ranked, but Alaska is a good football team. They
Hmm.
came into Stanford, and Stanford won 35-21 in this game. And it wasn't really in question for most of this game. I think that Stanford took it from the get go, took the lead, and never gave it back. Let me look here. No, they actually gave it at 2:55 because then you never give it back. So Stanford with the lead the entire game. Overall, just slightly better in yards and overall more clean and more efficient than Alaska. What do you think, Ryan?
And one thing quickly on Alaska before I shift to Stanford. I mean, I recruited Wade Feliciano as a walk-on at Utah State. Had him for 2 years before he came to Alaska Anchorage, where he's starting now. He's a great quarterback. He sees the field. He is a smart player. He plays the game the right way. There's always gonna be questions about his accuracy, but I think he proved against a pretty good defense that he can play. I mean, in terms of Stanford, you like what you see from Derek Ware putting up 120 points. 120 yards. Sorry, 120 points would be shocking. Tyrone Hackett putting up over 100 receiving yards as well. I think offense is firing on all cylinders, and even the defense. I mean, sometimes you'd be concerned if you're giving up 21 points to a G5 team, but in this scenario, I think it's just a matter of Alaska being good at offense rather than the Cardinal being bad at defense. So I would have nothing to worry about. I think there's a really bright future for this team moving forward, and yeah, they might not be able to compete this year, but the next couple of years, I'd watch out if I were in the pack.
I honestly believe that Stanford could take it this year in their division. I think that maybe it's the total picture is looking kind of hard because there are 7 ranked teams in the pack, and a
Mhm.
lot of them are in their division, 4 of them to be exact. But Stanford could definitely take this division if they continue this performance against good teams like Alaska, and
Yeah.
if they are efficient as they are today in their game plan. They kept to the plan. They threw the ball half the time, ran the ball half the time, and immediately just pounded the ball up the center. 187 rushing yards, slow playing it. Both teams had not a lot of yards, not a lot of possessions, and then they just won the game by doing that all game long.
Yeah, I mean, like just looking at their upcoming schedule, I think they're probably a lock for at least 8 wins, if not nine, and you can pencil them in for probably a couple more. I mean, they have a few couple tight spreads against Washington in week 3, or let's see over here against Washington State and San Diego State and Oregon in weeks 9 to 11. But I mean, the schedule's pretty favorable with the rest of it, so. Watch out. Stanford might be a real contender to take the pack this year, and even if they don't get it this year, they're going to be a real threat for a long time.
Absolutely. Stanford never goes away, and I don't think they're going away right now either.
I'm sure you know that the
Moving on.
best.
Moving on, we're going to go to number 16 in Oklahoma, the Boomer Sooners, my Big 12 favorites to win the conference. And not much to talk about here. Either 31-3 at home against Southern Miss, and just a dominating defensive performance, and nothing really to talk about other than the quarterback being good. Bomer High, I loved him. A little bit of concern, didn't throw many touchdowns, threw one pick, only one touchdown as well. It was just I think it's just how the game went. They kind of ran it up the middle and scored touchdowns that way and kept Southern Miss to nothing offensively.
I agree. I think this was a statement win from Coach Jysum, especially after a faction of the Sooner fan base wanted his job to be gone, honestly, in favor of old Purdue coach, Coach RG. So I think beating an up and coming Southern Mississippi team who was very active this offseason in CPR, 31-3, not even giving them any room to breathe. I think this is all positives for them.
we're going to really see how good Oklahoma is next week. They're going to go on the road at Wake Forest. That is going to be the true test that decides, for me, how legit Oklahoma really is.
And they're playing Ole Miss, Tulsa, and Nebraska down the stretch. We're going to see if they're frauds or not. Hopefully they aren't.
I hope they aren't either. Moving on, a big statement win for Virginia. Moving back to this game against Michigan, they were looking kind of down, not as good as they used to be, but immediately they shut up all the doubters. 36-33 win over Michigan on the road in Michigan. That is nuts that they got the win today. And they did it by rushing the ball. A lot of teams this year rushing the ball up the middle and getting huge wins. What do you think, Ryan?
I mean, I think I said it all when we were talking about Michigan, but the Ryan Callahan show, I think he has a solid case to be the best halfback in the country this season. I mean, he has 100 speed. He's super elusive. I think if old heads will remember running backs like Cam Scadaboo or like Ashton Jaunty, those players are really, really fast runners and they refuse to be brought down. I think Ryan Callahan's an exact replica of him.
Absolutely. You said it both. We've said a lot about Virginia. And lastly, that's what we're going to be leaving it at. What do you think, Ryan?
Sorry about that. Say it again.
We're going to be leaving it at that. We're going to be moving on to South Carolina. Sorry, I'm distracted really fast.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, I think I can take over really quickly for South Carolina. Just looking at who they play, they played Grambling State. Not sure what the spread was, but they only won by 11, only put up 25 points. I think Monkey D. Luffy, the former very, very prolific five-star recruit that cost two of South Carolina's star running backs to transfer as soon as he committed uh, to the Gamecocks, was very good. Brett White, the other running back, was very good. A few question marks over the offensive line, allowing Corey Silas to be sacked 3 times. But I think overall, the stats look a lot better than the score. And for some coaches, and I'm sure Coach Indiana Bond agrees with this, they care more about the process than the results. And I think the process went fine here. Maybe a few execution errors, but then again, it's week 1. We'll see what happens in the SEC.
Absolutely. And again, they just failed, for me, they just failed to put this game away late. And they could have won by a lot more based on the stats, it looks like. But they turned the ball over twice. They kind of dilly-dally, really. They don't put this game away. And another day, this could have been a loss. But today it was not. And I think this just gives them more time to complete what they wanted to do. And that's go for a playoff run.
Yeah.
Monkey D. Luffy is one of the best running backs in the country. And I think that he's going to be a humongous threat in the SEC and maybe for a potential Heisman coming forward into the future. This game,
Ooh.
93 yards rushing, 58 over the air. I think that he's legit on South Carolina.
Using the H route already in week 1, that's a bold prediction.
He's a very good player. I don't think that's a bold prediction at all.
All right, well, time will tell.
Absolutely. Moving on. Next is Wake Forest, the number 19 ranked Demon Deacons. And this game was nuts. I don't know if you saw anything about this game, Ryan, but this was a crazy game. I mean, 77-45 Wake Forest over South Florida and the Bulls. That is a crazy amount of scoring. How many is that? That's like 12, 15 scores in this game. They had 597 passing yards, 168 rushing yards. I mean, that is 700 yards total. What is going on, Ryan?
I mean, when I first saw this scoreline, I didn't watch the game. I was occupied with some other game day options. But I mean, I thought this was a basketball game. I thought I looked on the wrong sport on ESPN. Like just looking at this game was on crack. To be honest, like so much offense. I do have questions about Wake Forest's defense. They should not be this bad. They have Brian Tuminello, who's a 72 overall in their defensive line. They have Mike Cottrell, who's a 63 overall in their front seven. They have playmakers on defense, so I'm absolutely puzzled as to how they can give up 45 points to South Florida. But their offense Don't take it from me. Just look at the stat line. I think they're firing on all cylinders already.
Absolutely. And I will say their defense was a big contributor and a big flaw for them in this game. 45 points. But I will say their special teams was even worse. They allowed 2 punt return touchdowns in this game, which is just
That's horrible.
absolutely unacceptable. Unacceptable. Against South Florida, 2 punt return touchdowns. They'll need to clean that up if they do anything in the Power 5 level. But other than that, they look amazing.
I believe to set the record straight, they only gave up one, but the point still stands. The Bulls averaged 24 yards on kick returns, 43 yards on punt returns. Yeah, they got to clean that up. And one last thing before I move on, just look at who was actually throwing for the Bulls, because it wasn't even their starter, Troy James, who's out for a couple of weeks. Their backup quarterback, Justin Rowland, the 34 overall true freshman, he didn't do amazing, but he didn't do terribly bad. And when you have a true freshman quarterback, the number one goal for the defense should be to shut him down right away, get rid of any confidence he can have, because this is week one. He's an 18-year-old. For all we know, he doesn't know what's going on. This was their chance to kind of put this game away. And I mean, just look at the score. This might have been just a motivation issue or whatever, but I have some concerns about that moving forward.
Absolutely. I saw for the punt return thing, I saw a 75-yard touchdown. I thought that was a kick return, but it was not a kick return. It was just a 75-yard touchdown. Blown coverage, probably. I didn't watch the game. We'll have to look back and probably forget that for Wake Forest. They don't want to look at that anymore.
Oh, I mean, I think the offense wants to remember it, but yeah, everyone else on that team hopes that they have a short memory.
Maybe some laps going on for Wake Forest defensive players here.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on, number 20, Marshall. This is a team that was a sleeper pick for playoffs, and they showed us why. Baylor came in, and Baylor left down by almost 40. 51-14 win for Marshall, 425 passing yards, 198 rushing yards, complete dominance. Baylor didn't even have 200 yards of offense. What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, and I think this was a statement win once again by this Marshall team. They were mad that they were snubbed from the South Bend Invitational, and it showed today against Baylor. I If I wanted to shout out people on the team I thought that did a good job on the Thundering Herd, we'd be here all night. Just to name a few people, I think Najee Franks, 155 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. He was amazing. Joseph Delgado, 205 receiving yards with 2 touchdowns. He was amazing. Just all over the board. Torrey Wright has some weapons, and I would not be surprised if this team snuck into the playoffs as an undefeated G5 bid.
Absolutely. And I will say Baylor's 14 points both came in garbage time, and one was a kickoff that returned for 93 yards and a touchdown. And they had nothing all game. It was not even, those 14 points are basically mute. It was just not good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, enough about Marshall's blowing out. We're going to be moving to Miami and the Hurricanes, number 21 ranked. They played Air Force, much of the same, 38-6 win on the road for Miami, and a just easy win for them.
And yeah, just by the looks of it, I think Spencer Jones, 100 rushing yards, Tommy Sullivan, essentially perfect through the air, 4 touchdowns, no picks. I think there's a lot of things that you really like. I think the thing that you like the most if you're a Miami fan is Jalen Hunter. 4 receiving touchdowns. Wow, have you seen that before? I think he was exceptional, and he might not have been the best receiver on his team, arguably. You had Darian Leonard, who had even more receptions. The same amount of receptions and even more receiving yards. This 1-2 duo is a threat in the ACC, and I wouldn't be surprised. They're probably going to win the Coastal. I wouldn't be surprised if they win the conference once again.
Absolutely. They're a very, very strong team in the ACC and a team to look out for. One thing to note is Tony Block, the kicker for Miami, missed 2 field goals. They didn't need him today, but in a game that you need a kicker, he might not be there. We'll have to see going forward.
And yeah, when you're playing teams like Virginia or Army or Notre Dame, points are at a premium, and you can't afford to be leaving 3 points on the board because you have a college kicker. So that's going to need some tightening up. But overall, Virginia versus Miami for the Coastal is going to be a very, very tough fight. I would give the edge to Miami right now. But honestly, I think Virginia has a really good shot too. This is really up in the air.
Absolutely. Any final notes before we move on?
Get ready for a really tight race in the ACC. Seems like it's every year, and I think we're in for another good one.
Absolutely. Moving on to a big one. Number 22, Colorado on the road at Arizona State. Favored 5.5 only, and they do not cover the spread. They lose to Arizona State 27-20. An Arizona State team that nobody really looked at, but they have a new coach came in and he really worked in the offseason to get this team up to stuff. They won 27-20. They had more rushing yards than almost Colorado's total yards, 244 rushing yards. And they just right down the middle on Colorado. They couldn't do anything to stop it. And unfortunately for Colorado, they get upset. A thing to know about Colorado, they redshirted their expected starting quarterback and put in 44 overall sophomore Ben Vaughn, and it doesn't look too good right now for the Buffaloes. What do you think, Ryan?
I mean, yeah, I hate to be that guy, but I honestly think Colorado doesn't have too much to worry about. Steve Arias, their leading wide receiver, he was out. He only came in for a couple plays and left in the first quarter. Patrick Ezell, their top offensive lineman, their center, he's out for 2 games, and that led them to having to start Dexter Lang, a 42 overall junior on the offensive line. I think if you're at full strength, these guys are a much bigger force to be reckoned with. Arizona State, I don't want to say they got lucky, but they definitely got very fortunate with the timing, especially Ben Vaughn. He might have been very surprised to hear that he was the starter going into the season, expecting to be backing up the true freshman, but hey, I mean, he still got time to figure it out. It wasn't the prettiest, but Colorado, they're an up and coming program, and even if they don't hit 8, 9, or 10 wins this season, they're getting pretty close.
Absolutely. I think Colorado is on the rise. Arizona State is also on the rise. But the Big 12 this year, another year that it seems like they're going to be down. A lot of them getting upset here, a lot of them not winning the games that they should.
Mhm.
Any concerns about the Big 12 from you, Ryan, immediately?
I think, as always, the Big 12 seems to always cannibalize its own teams, especially in the North. Like you have Oklahoma State, you have Oklahoma, you have Tulsa, you have Colorado, you have Nebraska. All of these 5 teams could win the division. And I think it's going to create some very messy tie-breaking scenarios for stats nerds, but it's also going to just make it so that it's going to be very hard for any team from that division or that conference for that matter to make it into the playoffs. I think because obviously for a P5 conference champion, you probably want to go 12-1, at the very worst 11-2. And when you have to play 4 very quality teams in your division, not to mention potentially facing teams like Texas and TCU on the other side of the conference, it's going to be a challenge. I think Big 12 cannibalism is back at it again.
Absolutely. And what about the MAC? I think that the MAC is the sixth best conference. They might be fifth on my list this year because they have pulled off yet another upset coming up next. Number 23, Tulsa, goes down at home to Buffalo with a score of 24-17. Tulsa was expected to win this game. I don't think it was four. The spread was four. They were expected to win this game, and it was very low scoring affair. 14-3 at half, Buffalo, and Tulsa returned fire, 17-17 with a touchdown and then another touchdown. 13 seconds left. Buffalo down the field. Elmer Ehambe rushes it up the middle, 9 yards, and Buffalo delivers the dagger to upset the number 23 ranked Tulsa Golden Hurricane. What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, and honestly, I'm not really sure that Tulsa's defense could have done any better other than containing Elmer Ahambe. Because Todd Hernandez, before going down with an injury, he was throwing 40%. And obviously, you'd like to get to the quarterback once the backup's in there, especially because Torrey Fales was who they turned to next was a kicker, and he threw two interceptions. But the Buffalo defense, or sorry, the Tulsa defense, I think did its job. It's just containing the run. That's something they're probably going to struggle to do going down the road as well. Um, but overall, I think if you're Tulsa, you probably just want to forget this one and move on because they have arguably a top 20 defense. So I'm not really sure what happened on the ground, but you flip the page, you go into the next game and hope it doesn't come to hurt you. The good thing about week one is that you don't play conference opponents, so they have still have a very good shot of winning their division, maybe even their conference.
Absolutely. And I think that Buffalo is a fringe top 25 team. I think they're going to be ranked coming into next week. In my opinion, they should be. What do you think about the Buffalo Bulls that makes them maybe a contender in the MAC?
Let me take a look at their roster here. I think their offensive line is probably one of the best in college football right now. They're ranked sixth. I might even place them a little bit higher. Their fifth offensive lineman is a 51 overall. You have NFL, NZCFL talent. All five of them are seniors. All five of them might get drafted. That's how good of an offensive line. The defensive line, they have a 65 overall, 62 overall, 55 overall, 53 overall. On the trenches, they're winning. And I think that's the key to success. Their quarterback is a 29 overall junior. That's not the best thing ever. But I mean, they have time to fix it. And especially when you have blockers like that, it makes it a little bit better.
Absolutely. And a thing of note about Buffalo, they don't have a punter. They straight up don't have a punter. They walk into the season without one, and then their quarterback goes down, and they don't have a quarterback. So they ran today without a quarterback half the game and without a punter, and they won against a ranked team. This Buffalo team is a lot more underrated than I think they are. They are very much better than their overall is.
They don't play very attractive football, I guess you could say, but they get the job won. They do the dirty work in the trenches, and if I'm in the MAC, I'm watching out for them. I don't think they're my favorite to win the conference, but I think they're definitely a threat.
Absolutely. I think that their offense is a little too stagnant and one
Mhm.
dimensional. And that's going to cost them, I think, in the MAC. But initially, a good win, and we'll see how it pays forward to the rest of the game.
If Alhambra keeps running for 140 yards every single game, they might go undefeated. We don't know.
We'll see, I guess, huh? All right. Next team, number 24, Oregon. They played Yale at home, and Yale is a solid team this year. They were pretty dang good. They're solid mid pack in their conference. Oregon wins 41-23. Take care of business. But did you see their rushing game? Oregon, 303 rushing yards. They completely bullied Yale out there. They bullied them. Every single play, they were pushing Yale's D line back, and there's a reason for it. Yale has four roster D line, four of them. And one of them is a 29 and another is a 33. That's the
Mhm.
reason Yale got bullied today, and that's the reason they lost. They could not stop Oregon's rushing game. It was completely just domination. What do you think
Yeah,
about that, Ryan?
and the game looks close, like relatively close based on the scoreline, but oh boy, this was a tale of two halves. Oregon was up 31-3 at the end of the first half. I think the Ducks kind of just took their foot a little bit off the gas pedal, which might not be the best thing to do in the pack, but against Yale, certainly worked out for them. I would like to see a little bit more consistency in the second half. They're letting Yale get a little bit of life. They came to within 18 points with 12 minutes to play, which I mean isn't too close, but it isn't insurmountable as well. I would watch out if I was the Oregon Ducks. I mean, we mentioned them a couple times and talked about the tough pack schedule. I think they're a very solid team this year, and I think they're only going to get better.
Absolutely. And I think that Yale needs to keep their heads up. I think this is a good Oregon team. Not many teams in their division have the offensive line that a Power Five like Oregon has. So I think
Mhm.
Yale will be overall looking better than they were today. And I think that it's just the trenches not going in their favor.
Yep, agree.
Moving on, the last ranked team on our list, number 25, Washington. I'm just going to skip over this really quickly. Washington destroyed 41-10 over San Jose State on the road. Three turnovers, which is not great, but again, 41-10. not that much of a concern for me. What do you think?
I mean, legendary coach Abdrab always had used to have a problem at Washington with his quarterbacks. I think that might be continuing even if with his absence. You can call it the ghost of Abdrab or something because Trevon Hampton, he did go 24 for 33 with 272 yards. I will give him that, but he threw for 0 touchdowns and had 2 picks. And that's really my big question mark because you're playing San Jose State. When I was in the Mountain West, this was a game we normally look forward to because it was usually guaranteed win chalked up on our roster. They have 10 punters on their roster. They have 5 kickers. Um, they're not a contending program right now. And I think even Spartan fans would admit that. They have maybe 2 players over 40 overall in their defense. You can't be throwing 2 interceptions to them if you're Washington and you want to make a deep run into the postseason with inside the pack.
I agree. I just think that Trevon Hampton was not taking this game very seriously. And in a program like Washington, you need to take every single game very, very seriously.
Hmm.
He just throws a little bit of questionable passes. They get picked off, and you're just sitting there. You're up 41-10. You're goofing off. You're having fun, but you can't do that against Nebraska, Stanford, which are our next 2 games. You got what USC on the schedule, Ohio State, Oregon. We'll see how he pans out over the year, but again, not the greatest performance in day one.
Yeah. And does that wrap it up for the top 25 secret?
That is it. That is the final 25 teams.
All right. And so I guess I can just conclude this a little bit with a round cast of a few other storylines. I'm also going to introduce my offensive and defensive players of the week. So while I'm talking secret, I'll give you some time to look at that for yourself as well. But I think the first thing that we can look forward to in my very short monologue at the end is look out Missouri because I was very surprised at their impressive win. They won by 40 this week against UAB, who's not a terrible team, and look at their schedule moving forward. I think they're favored in almost every single game by double digits, if not 20 points. Let me just pull it up here. They have 28.5, 10.5, 27.5, blah, blah, blah. We're going all over here. Their only really close game is against Grambling State in week 11, and they're still favored by 3. And if they can pull that off, I mean, there is precedent for the committee to leave out an undefeated G5 conference champion, but Missouri isn't um, a fraudulent enough, I think, to leave them out. So they might be a contender for a playoff run, especially because they beat UAB by 40 points in a game they were only favored by 4.5. And I think they're super underrated by the engine. One last thing before we go to our offensive and defensive players of the week is just that wild, wild Oregon State game. I just really want to pull that up real quick against Wyoming. I think, and Secret, feel free to chime in after I'm done with this. This was mostly a case of Wyoming losing rather than Oregon State winning. Because, I mean, Wyoming, they had higher expectations than to lose to this Oregon State team. I think Coach Dan, he's well loved around the league, but he's not really that active with the actual recruiting process. I mean, the team is a minus 90. They were underdogs by 15 points here, by almost 3 scores. This isn't something that you want to do, especially because Wyoming was up 32-21 with just over 2 minutes left. Then Oregon State came back, and then ooh, the kicker woes started. You had 2 missed field goals by Jeremy Handy of the Cowboys and 2 missed extra points as well. That is 8 points he left on the board. They lost by 3 points, and you want to have those back, especially because Oregon State's not going to be the toughest team that you play all year. So Wyoming's going to really want to improve on that, and Oregon State. They're going to be really happy with this. It's not going to be a very smooth season for them in a very, very tough conference, but at least they can relish this one. And with
I
that,
mean,
Secret, do you have anything to say on that?
absolutely. I mean, this is just a crazy, crazy choke by Wyoming. They had multitude of chances to take this game into the end of the game. They had 2 times at the end of the game they could have scored a touchdown. That game would have been over. They had 2 chances to kick field goals. They missed them both. The extra points, they missed all of that. It's just like, what is going on, Wyoming? You had so many chances to just end this game immediately, and every time you failed to end it. And this is one of the biggest chokes I've seen in a while. Like, this is crazy.
It was absolutely awful, and I think Coach Gabe knows what he has to fix, and they're going to want revenge in their next week matchup.
Absolutely.
All right. I guess just to conclude this hour-long segment, then, just running out of time here, we're going to present our offensive and defensive players of the week. So I guess I can go first to give Secret a little bit more time if he needs it. But on the offensive side of the ball, I promise this isn't Big Ten bias, but I have to give it to Ashton Williams here. He had a perfect passer rating, 6 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, fought over 450 yards. And I think what distinguishes him from the rest of the very, very stacked quarterback lineup that we saw from this week is that he did it against Florida in the Swamp. He led his team to beat Florida 70-26. And it's something no one could have seen coming. I think Wisconsin, they might not be favored to win the Big Ten, but they are definitely a potential to be a spoiler for a couple of these games. I'm looking at you, Northwestern and Utah State. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I have out of Toledo, Darius Wainwright, who had 4 sacks en route to helping his team squeak out a win 23-17 over the Cincinnati Bearcats. I mean, Toledo doesn't have too much talent on the roster, and so you best know he was getting double team all game, and he was still putting up these accolades as a 40 overall true freshman. You gotta give it to the kid.
Absolutely. Did you want my picks for players of the week, or what were we doing here?
If you have any in mind, feel free to give them a shout out. Otherwise, we'll just assume that you agree with me. So there's no real obligation either way.
I was going to say for offense, I don't know about defense. I didn't really look too far into it, but Chris Jennings of Navy had an
Hmm.
amazing game. I don't know if you saw his stat line: 514 yards of passing, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions, 86% completion. Absolutely
It's a
nuts.
new era in Annapolis, and I think Chris Jennings, the junior, he had a really good game. I'm really excited to see what comes out of the Naval Academy.
Absolutely. They're a very exciting up and coming program. Maybe we can see them challenge Army eventually, but we'll have to see how that goes.
Army's had a very dominant streak against Navy, but maybe Navy fans have a little bit of hope, and maybe Army's run of dominance is coming to an end. I mean, they lost to Bama. We don't know what's up.
Absolutely. They play like they did against Bama, turnovers, turnovers, turnovers. Yeah, maybe we see Navy pull out something, but we'll have to see how it goes. And what week is that? Week 9 or week 8 or something?
Week 8, I believe they're playing
Week 8.
Army. Yeah.
It's yeah, it's week 8. Sorry, there's so many Army Navies because they replaced those games.
Mhm.
So I got confused. Any other segments you have, Ryan?
No, I think we're really excited football's back. We have a couple weeks ahead of us of exciting football, and we'll hopefully see all of our listeners soon. If you stuck with us for the whole hour and change to listen to us yap, thank you so much. And if you didn't, and if you just skipped to us talking about your team, you're not gonna hear me talking, but at least thanks for tuning in and boosting our viewership.
Absolutely. It was a fun time talking with you, Ryan, and a great time on the NZCFL podcast once again.
All right, thanks, Secrets, and we'll see the world soon.